Step number 4, the electron transport chain. So this is the fourth and final step in aerobic respiration, and this is going to utilize the mitochondrion. And so I'm just reviewing the anatomy of the mitochondrion with you here. Remember that inside the mitochondrion, we have an inner membrane that's folded up into a structure called the cristae. We have an outer membrane that encloses the mitochondrion and an inner membranous space where I put that red dot I abbreviated there. That's the inner membranous space. The matrix is the region that we find. I'm going to just color in green in here. And the matrix was where the Krebs cycle took place. So we're now looking at the electron transport chain, and we're going to utilize the cristae, the inner membranous space, and the outer membrane. So I'm going to redraw just a small portion of that mitochondria here. So this line is going to represent the outer membrane of the mitochondria. The cristae I'm going to take and I'm going to stretch it out so it's just a straight line so I can draw the other processes taking place. So this is the inner membrane that forms that cristae. This is going to be the inner membranous space in here. Inner membranous space on the left. And on the right we have the matrix of the mitochondria. So important components that make up the electron transport chain. We have electron carriers embedded in the electron transport chain, and I'm just going to designate them as these X's. These electron carriers are primarily made of cytochromes, but at any rate, they're embedded in the inner membrane. And it's not quite this simple. They're more like a complex, but just for our purposes so you can see what's going on, there are proton pumps also associated with these electron carriers. And the proton pumps I'm illustrating as these orange dots here. So that's a proton pump. So to begin the process of the electron transport chain, what we feed into this step are all of the hydrogen that we have harvested previously from the earlier 3 steps. So we know that glycolysis produced 2 molecules of NADH plus H+. We know that we produced 6 molecules of that from the Krebs cycle, and then we know we produced 2 molecules of FADH2 from the Krebs cycle. So the hydrogen that we have harvested from glycolysis and from the Krebs cycle, here's where they're going to get dropped in and used, and we're going to use the energy associated with these hydrogen atoms to produce ATP. So the hydrogen are going to enter the chain, but in reality, see, these are electron carriers. So it's actually the electrons associated with hydrogen that will be accepted by our electron carriers. So if I start with 2 atoms of hydrogen that come from these guys, so they're dropping the hydrogens off, and I split them, and I send the electrons down the electron transport chain. These electron carriers accept those electrons 2 at a time. So we split these 2 electrons off. That's going to leave behind these 2 hydrogen ions here. And the electron carriers are going to move down the electron transport chain. As the electrons move down the electron transport chain, they're losing energy. So they're in a very high energy position here. So this is a high energy position. It's like going down a staircase. They have a lot of energy by position or state. So this is potential energy. As they move from one step to the next, they lose a little energy. As they move from the next step to the next, they lose a little bit more energy. The energy that they use is the energy that the proton pumps will use to pump a proton. They'll pump a proton from the matrix into the inner membranous space. So then again, when the electrons move from one carrier down to the next, that proton pump will use some of that energy that's lost to pump protons into the inner membranous space. And again, as the electrons continue down the chain, the proton pumps are pumping more hydrogen ions into the inner membranous space. So what we're creating here is really important. What we're creating here is a high hydrogen ion concentration in this space. Because we have this high hydrogen ion concentration, we are storing or stockpiling potential energy over here. Because what will happen next these hydrogen ions are going to want to move back across this membrane because they're accumulating themselves in a high concentration. They're going to want to move from where they're in high concentration here back to where they're now in low concentration in the matrix. So we have a special structure at the end of this chain. And our special structure is called an ATP synthase. It's an enzyme complex that looks a lot like that. It has a channel in it, and that channel will accommodate hydrogen ions. So those hydrogen ions will diffuse using simple diffusion through that ATP synthase. It will diffuse through that complex. And as the hydrogen moves from high to low concentration, that generates energy that's going to be used to phosphorylate a molecule of ADP to produce ATP. So see, this complex is called an ATP synthase. So it's named for what it does. It synthesizes ATP. So when the hydrogen moves from high to low concentration, the energy that's created as it moves down that concentration gradient is this energy right here. That energy will be used to tack this phosphate group onto adenosine diphosphate to produce adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. The final big important thing that's going to happen here in this electron transport chain is what happens to the electrons at the bottom of the chain. Because this step, the electron transport chain, this is where we directly use oxygen in the process of aerobic respiration. So these electrons right here have to have somewhere to go when they get to the bottom of the chain. They will be accepted by molecular oxygen. So the oxygen that we breathe serves as, and this is important, serves as the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain. So that oxygen is going to accept these electrons. It's going to combine with the two hydrogen ions that were up here that we left behind initially when we split the hydrogen atoms. It's going to recombine with that, and what will that form? That's going to form water. So this is known as metabolic water. It's produced in the electron transport chain as the very final thing that happens. When the electrons come off the electron transport chain, again, they're accepted by oxygen. They'll recombine with those hydrogen ions to form water, and that is a summary of the electron transport chain.